Hey everybody, this is Fran from the 5 Minute Modeler. Today I'm building a cool little detail for the model train layout. This item is called a pipe gate, and in some instances it's called a smashboard. Generally, these were used to block entrance to a restricted area. This might be a road or a driveway to an industry. It may be used by a railroad to block the access road alongside the tracks, and in some cases it may be used to protect a grade crossing between two railroads. Here are some pictures of pipe crossings or smashboards where the two railroads' tracks cross. Typically these are used where there's light traffic on one of the lines and is set to warn approaching trains as well as to protect the primary line. If a train on the secondary line approached the gate, they would stop, unlock it, and swing it to where the primary line would be protected. The train would cross, then the brakeman would move the gate back in place and secure it, and the train would proceed on its way. So these pipe gates are used at railroad crossings or to control access to a private road or something like that. Although I don't have any crossings on my layout, I've seen several layouts where modelers have another railroad cross their railroad by having a track appear and then head off the edge of the layout after crossing the modeler's track. This would be a great detail for something like that. Here's an example for a model railroad layout. The good thing is that this is a simple project that will take less than an hour, and you can make several of them at the same time to put around your layout or share with your modeling friends. Now, I'm not the first person to come up with this device as an idea for a model railroad. There's been several other people that have published reports about this, but this is my take on it. What you'll need is this: bendable wire such as a brass or steel. Copper wire will be likely too pliable and will likely get bent on the layout. I've used both steel wire guitar strings and brass wire from my scrap box for this. Some people call the guitar string wire piano wire, which you can get at the hobby shop. I also am using steel tubing from K&S Precision Industries. I'm using 1/16 inch for end scale. You might need a little bit larger for HO. Other scales may require even larger, but you might also be able to use plastic tubing. The wire needs to be able to fit in the tubing and be able to turn freely. That's the main thing. You'll need wire cutters, needle nose pliers, a razor saw, a pencil tip soldering iron with solder or CA glue, a piece of scrap rail, some safety yellow paint or something close, and some type of white glue. I use Eileen's. If you use styrene rod or other plastics, your tools will differ slightly. Here's the design I drew, and it should be easily adjusted for other scales. Use your scale ruler to measure. You can pause this video if you'd like to get a screenshot of this for reference. The numbers for each piece are in scale feet, so it should translate to any scale, despite the fact that I built mine in N scale. I start by cutting a piece of wire about 16 scale feet. This will be the primary pipe supporting the rest of the gate and will slide into the piece of tubing.
Like that.
I then cut another section of wire about 37 scale feet, and this will be used to create the gate. I'll make just two bends in the wire. Using the needle nose pliers, I hold the wire at about the 18-foot mark and bend the wire to a 90-degree angle. This will be the bottom of the gate. Then I make another bend about 3 feet up for the side of the gate that will be connected to the pivot piece, and bend it until the end of the wire crosses the bottom piece with 3 or 4 feet of the bottom piece sticking out. Don't worry if it's a little long, you can cut it to size with wire cutters. Once the gate is bent properly and to your satisfaction, you can get out your soldering iron and heat it up. You will need to solder 2 joints. I tape my pieces down so they don't move around when I touch them with the iron. I then solder the gate to the main pipe first. I then solder the joint where the top pipe meets the bottom pipe. Once those are done, I put just a bit of solder on the main pipe. This will hold the gate up and prevent it from slipping into the tube. Next, using a razor saw, you will want to cut your tubing to about 8 scale feet. Make sure that the wire used for the gate will fit into the tube and swing freely.
Like that.
In the painting section, I'm going to show you the errors I made so that you won't need to make the same ones and waste your time. First, I'm going to clean the gates with isopropyl alcohol to remove any oils on the various pieces. This will help the paint to adhere to the metal surfaces. Next, I spray all sides with the gray primer from a rattle can. This came out fine. If I had a rattle can of yellow paint, I would likely use that to paint them as it would be quick and easy. But I don't, and it didn't make sense to buy a can for this little project. I selected an acrylic paint I had with a deep yellow color. I thought this would represent the safety yellow color pretty well, and I could then weather it to taste. I started by brushing the first gate of the 4 I made. For some reason, after numerous tries, I just couldn't get good coverage with this paint. I thought that maybe it was too wet, so maybe spraying with my airbrush would get the job done. I stuck the gates into a piece of foam for easier handling. I pulled out the airbrush, thinned and mixed the paint, strained it, then started spraying it. I sprayed it, then dried it with a hairdryer, sprayed it again, then dried it again, and repeated this process numerous times. The gates were turning slightly yellow, but this was taking way too long to cover, and it was very uneven coverage. So I gave up on the airbrush and decided to brush paint these. Maybe there was something I was doing wrong originally. In fact, the first one hadn't been primer, so maybe that's why the paint didn't stick when I originally brushed it. But again, I was having the same poor results. Then the light bulb went off, and I remembered something I had learned a long time ago about paints. That some paints are translucent and others are opaque, meaning you can't see through them. I wondered if my deep yellow was a translucent paint and that's why it wasn't covering like I expected. I did a quick internet search and found a quick way to test if a paint is translucent or opaque. That was to take a brush and dip it in the paint, then drop it on a surface and pull the brush down. By doing this, you can see from this example that my deep yellow was actually a translucent paint. I used another color, yellow ochre, and sure enough, that was actually opaque. So moral of the story is to check your paint for opaqueness before painting. At this point, I was pretty ticked at myself and the amount of time and effort I spent to find this out and to test the opaqueness theory. I brush painted one of the gates with the yellow ochre, and lo and behold, it covered in one coat. Rather than mix more paint for the airbrush, I decided to just brush paint the rest of the gates. That said, in the future, I would prefer to use the airbrush. Once the pieces are painted, dried, and weathered appropriately, I added a stop sign. I had printed a bunch of these off of my computer some time ago and trimmed them from the sheet, then glued it to the gate with Eileen's glue. Now it's time to plant the gate. In my case, I used the gate to block entrance to a railroad service road that parallels a part of my railroad track. You'll often notice these roads alongside the tracks, especially near crossings. My layout mostly uses insulation foam with the light coating of drywall plaster over it, so I simply pushed the tube into the insulation until the top was even with the ground. I pulled it out, added a little glue, and then slid it back into the hole. Then it was a simple task to thread the stem of the gate into the hole. I added the rail for support on the opposite side of the road, and though the gate didn't need support, it does add to the scenic accuracy. If you're going to use this to protect a rail crossing, I'd suggest locating it between 8 and 15 scale feet of the main line. If you're using something else for your scenery, you may have to drill a hole with a drill, then glue the pipe into the hole. After inserting the pipe into the hole, make sure it swings freely. If you want to get really detailed, you can add a rusty chain to allow authorized personnel to unlock the gate. Don't forget to add the stop sign or a keep out sign for the visual effect that will draw your eye to the gate. I hope you found this interesting and you learned something from my mistakes. It's a detail I think everyone can add to their layout and will provide a rather unique detail most layouts don't have. Thanks again for watching another episode of the 5 Minute Modeler.